60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA Podcast here on a Wednesday. I am your host, Kevin Noon, and I want to thank you for listening to the show. Be sure to follow us either on YouTube or SoundCloud or Apple iTunes, wherever you get the podcast from, so you don't miss a single episode. We are getting ready for week 2 of the season. Week 1 is in the books. Ohio State 52-17 winners over Nebraska, and now getting ready to take on a Penn State team that thought they had a game in hand and suddenly saw it fall apart and lost 36-35 at Indiana. We'll talk about that in a little bit more, but I want to welcome in our guest, Justin Whitlatch, who is our analyst at Buckeye Grove and does a great job breaking down X's and O's. And, you know, Justin, welcome to the show. And it must be great being able to actually talk about actual games and not so much about what Ohio State did a year ago or 2 years ago or anything of that nature.
Yes, definitely. I appreciate it, Kevin. It's like we talked about, it was much easier to finally break down a game and really get into the X's and O's of what's actually happening and not more of the philosophy-related stuff in the offseason that people will read, but at the same time, people want to see the scheme actually play out. So it's definitely good to get through week 1.
Exactly. And in week 1, Ohio State, as I said, 52-17 winner over Nebraska. Certainly was not the cleanest of games. I think when you look at the beginning, Nebraska marches down the field 75 yards on 4 plays, eventually an Adrian Martinez 10-yard touchdown. It was a close game going to halftime, 24-14. What were some of the early struggles that you saw upon looking at the tape and everything else with the offense and the defense to kind of start things out?
I'll start defensively, since that was kind of more of the focus with my article, and that's what pretty much caught everybody's attention. Defensively, we had to replace 7 starters, a lot of guys that got drafted and playing on Sundays. And that in itself is hard to overcome. Nebraska hired a new offensive coordinator, which Ohio State, and Kerry had mentioned this as well, had no film on and nothing to prepare for in practice. And it's the first live action in October. So all things considered, I think many of us expected a slow start, but we didn't expect Nebraska in 4 plays to score and almost make it look easy. But some of the schematics of what happened, like I mentioned in the article, was Nebraska used a lot of condensed sets to really tighten our defense down and create an extra gap towards the numbers in the sideline. And that really is where they tried to attack early on. And I mentioned in the article, Nebraska used a lot of crack blocks versus our man coverage to get our corners out of the play. And our safeties off of that are supposed to crack replace, which we definitely struggle with early on, and that's why you saw a lot of the runs get bounced to the outside, and we struggle to contain it. Same goes for our linebackers. When that happens, our corners have to communicate that there's a crack block coming so they can get under it, and they don't get taken out of the play, and they're able to take a great angle pursuit to the ball and be able to track it down. And early on, that did not happen. And it was really apparent, especially when Kerry mentioned in the post game. As you go back and watch the film, he's definitely correct. Their DBs really struggled early on to replace that crack block. But once that got adjusted right before the half, once they put 14 up, the defense adjusted to that, and Nebraska really struggled from there on. And I think a big part of it also, our defensive line, it's almost like they woke up and knocked off the rust. We definitely started to get a little more penetration, and Nebraska had a hard time moving the line of scrimmage. So all things considered defensively, once we got adjusted, I think things smoothed out. But some of the differences I think defensively that we saw was we played a little bit more two high, which Madison, the guy that came from Michigan, he's more of a two high guy. And then they also mixed in some one high like they did a year ago. So that was kind of the different changes that we saw. We saw Ohio State get into a nickel personnel where they brought Proctor into the game. And that's a change up from last year as well. So looks like we want to be the one high cover 3 man team that we were a year ago, but it looks like we're making some changes based on some new personnel in the game. So defensively, I think that's a small portion of what happened, but hopefully we can get it fixed for week 2 because we got Penn State coming in. Offensively, I know we struggled up front. Everybody and their mother saw that we struggled in the run game, but again, it all came down to communication and really being able to ID the front and getting it cleaned up with the guards and tackles. We had a hard time communicating on who's got the 3 technique and who's got the linebacker. And again, that's gonna happen. It's the first game of the year, and it's October, so those are things that can get worked out in practice and that can get fixed. And you saw later in the game, we didn't struggle as much with communication, and that's definitely why you saw runs get popped off for 10, 12 yards. And Nebraska did a really good job, I thought, of outnumbering our box. They were playing their force player closer to the box, where Ohio State was -1. So they were trying to outnumber us and get the ball out in the passing game, which Ohio State's got a great one. So it just they were trying to play a numbers game. If they're going to outnumber the box, the ball's going to get put in the air, which it did. So with Ohio State, you're going to have to really pick your poison this year. Do you want to outnumber and stop the run, or do you want to be in too high and do you want to stop the pass? So it's going to be hard for defenses this year to really stop Ohio State because they've got so many weapons everywhere, and you can't just stop one portion of the game. So I think that's a small overview of what happened. I was pretty pleased coming for the game being October, week 1, knocking rust off for a Big Ten opponent. Usually this is an FAU or Miami, Ohio, and we're able to knock the rust off with them. But getting right into Big Ten play, I think I was pretty pleased.
So many things, when we talk about this is, week to week is based on the opponent you're playing and a lot of other circumstances. But if you were on the coaching staff and you had to like isolate one thing on offense and one thing on defense that you would like to see the team improve upon getting ready to go into this Penn State game. And we'll talk about that in the second segment here of the BIA podcast about Penn State in particular. But what are a couple things that you think, one on offense, one on defense, they need to focus on the most in rectifying, getting stronger at, whatever it may be, to show that that progression from the first week to the second week?
I think offensively they need to create an identity in the run game. They've got 3 backs that can do all different things, but we saw Teague struggle with both inside zone and he struggled with mid zone, which are 2 different schemes. It requires different footwork, but I think he really struggled with those 2 concepts. And I think Sermon as well was knocking off the rust. But I think we have to have an identity, and I think that our back, we need to figure out what our backs can do and dictate off of their success. And I think going back to Nebraska, I think Teague is the north and south guy, and I think Sermon and the third back that came in, I forget his name off the top of my head right now.
Chambers.
Chambers, there we go. And I think they're the mid-zone, outside zone backs. I think they're a little more patient, and I think Chambers was really explosive, and that's kind of what you saw with Dobbins. Dobbins would be patient up to the line of scrimmage, and then when he made his cut, he was explosive north and south. So I think they need to really clean up of what they want to be in the run game wise, because like you saw on Saturday, they threw many passing concepts and Fields was able to hand it all. So I think they really need to figure out run game wise of what they want to be, and I hope that they're repping it quite a bit of practice, because Day always says that for them they got to run a scheme, or they've got to rep a scheme 1,000 times before he wants to call it. So I really hope we get that figured out before week 2, because Penn State's going to be Penn State's going to outnumber the box, and they're going to force us to throw the football. So offensively, I think the run game issue needs to get fixed. I think we need to figure out what scheme it needs to be called. Defensively, I think our linebackers struggled a bit, and I think that definitely needs to get figured out, because I think here soon teams are going to attack Browning, because I think he struggled in space, and I think he struggled just with minor stuff with teams motioning and him being able to adjust on the fly. I think he struggled a little bit in man coverage. So I think the linebacking crew and them having the right personnel on the field is going to be huge moving forward. I would like to see the nickel personnel a little bit more on Saturday, just because of what Penn State can do. They've got the best tight end in the country, and I'm nervous that Browning's going to get matched up with him, and I think it's going to be a long night for him. So I really hope we get the linebacker position figured out and what personnel is going to fit each week, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And, and we'll talk about Penn State here in a second, but I want to let everybody know, once again, you're listening to the BIA Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. You're listening to Justin Whitlatch, our great analyst, and we will talk about Ohio State's next opponent on the other side of this quick break. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the show. This is the BIA Podcast, and we are talking some X's and O's with Justin Whitlatch. In the first segment, we obviously talked about the game that was Nebraska 52-17, and now we're going to be talking about Ohio State's next opponent, Penn State, a team that really had a game get away from them, and, we can talk about that in a second, but I want to really ask Justin first, from watching their tape, and we're going to have a piece coming out on Thursday more specifically about what Penn State does, but, what are some of your overall impressions, and what do you think that they're going to try and do to Ohio State on this Halloween night game?
Before we get into any matchup or personnel related, I would like to point out that Penn State, pretty much dominated every statistical category that you can think of other than the turnover battle. And usually when that happens, I know everyone likes to talk about the turnover battle, and if you win that, you win the game. That happens. But if you look at time of possession, total yards, yards per play, and then, defensively for Penn State, they dominated a majority of the game. It's just their quarterback struggled early and late in the game with turnovers, and that really cost them the game. They gave Indiana a really short field. And Indiana, credit to Indiana, they took advantage. But if you watch that game from beginning to end, there was no business Indiana winning that football game. So that's just speaking from a statistics side of it. But offensively, I think we just got word today that their back's going to be out for the year. So they're down to their third or fourth back, Kevin?
Yeah, they're down to their third back, Devin Ford, and then they have a pair of true freshmen. They lost Journey Brown before the start of the season. And then Noah Kane, I think he was in for a handful of plays against Indiana, and he was lost. And James Franklin came out on, Tuesday, and said that they would not have him for the rest of the year. The rumor I heard was broken foot, but I'm not a doctor and I'm not privy to all that information. but that's what I was told.
Yeah. So they're really thin at the running back position. But if you watch the Indiana game from front to back, they built their whole offense around the best tight end in the country, and that's definitely what they're going to utilize on Saturday. They run a lot of inside zone. They run a lot of screens and RPOs to their tight end, but they've built that entire offense around his strengths. And on Saturday, our Sam linebacker is usually always matched up with the tight end, and our Sam linebacker is Baron Browning, who will get his second start versus the best tight end in the country. So I'm a little worried as to how we're going to defend the tight end. Are we going to bring in a nickel and then put maybe Warner on the tight end? But when it comes down to college football in the NFL, it all comes down to matchups. And I know Penn State's licking their chops, thinking that a guy that's having a second start of his career is going to be matched up with the best tight end in the country. So defensively, I'm a little worried as to what we're going to do. If we're going to play the nickel, I would feel a little bit better, especially with them having some issues at back and having a lot of injuries. I would feel a little bit better about the game going into Saturday if we have an athletic safety type on their tight end. Now that creates a size issue, so I don't know. I'm worried as to how we're going to defend the tight end. I've never seen, since Dave's been at the helm, I've never seen us bracket a tight end. So it'll be interesting to see how we really defend that matchup, because I think that's going to be the key to the game, is how are we going to defend the tight end, and are we going to be able to slow him down? Going to the other side of the ball, Penn State's defense is really aggressive. They like to pack the box. They're always going to be +1. If you watch the Indiana game, they always either had a safety roll down into the box, or they would walk an outside linebacker into the box, so they were always +1 in the run game. And Indiana really struggled to run the football because they had 41 total yards. Indiana had 41 total yards for Penn State on Saturday, and they've got a pretty good back. So Penn State's going to force us to throw the football, which we've got Justin Fields. So I would be perfectly fine with that if I were Ryan Day. They do play a lot of cover one, so Day's going to have his hands, or not his hands full. He's going to have the matchup that he's going to want to create, because they move the receivers around so much that I think he's going to be able to dictate the matchup in the passing game. So I'm not worried about us being able to score and put points on the board. I think it's just going to be through the air mostly. Speaking of personnel, I don't know how much 12 personnel he wants to run, but if Day wants to even the box, he's going to have to use 2 tight ends. So that's kind of the overview that I have of both the O and D. I went through the Indiana Penn State tape 3 times now. That's kind of the overall schematic part of it that I think really is going to happen on Saturday.
Was there anything when you watched the tape multiple times that really surprised you, whether it be, I didn't think they were going to be this good at this, or maybe something on the, conversely of, I thought they would have been better at this? And I understand we're 1 week into the season. Ohio State certainly, it put up 52 points, but it also showed, some vulnerabilities or whatnot. Was there anything positive or negative that really kind of surprised you looking at this Penn State team versus, maybe what you would have watched in different capacities over the previous years?
Yeah, positively, I think they moved the ball at will. I was really surprised when it was live Saturday, I got into it maybe halfway through, and I saw the score, and I assumed that the offense struggled that day. They weren't able to move the ball because they didn't put very many points on the board. But if you roll the tape back, they moved the ball at will in Indiana, and the scheme looked pretty good. They were getting the matchups that they wanted in the pass and run game. So I was surprised at how well they moved the ball. But as soon as they got inside the 30, inside the 20 is when they struggled, and that's really when they turned the ball over too. Franklin, a couple times, and their OC rolled out the Wildcat with their backup quarterback, and he also struggled. He gave up a fumble inside the red zone. So if they can clean those things up, I think it's going to be a much tighter game than people expect on Saturday. But if they're going to make the same mistakes like they did, they had a ton of penalties, I think. They turned the ball over. Their kicking game was horrendous on Saturday as well. So if they can clean those 3 things up, I think it's going to be a much tighter game. And I was really disappointed in their man coverage. Indiana multiple times had separation. It's just the quarterback could not get it to him. You'll see early in the game, the first couple of drives, Indiana, 3rd and 3, runs 4 verts, and they've got wide open Z receiver, separation by 5 or 10 yards, and the quarterback overthrows. So there were many opportunities for Indiana to score and maybe open it up, but they just couldn't execute and they couldn't convert. So if Penn State's going to play a better team like they are in Ohio State and they convert those, I think they're going to struggle. So it all comes down to execution and what Penn State's going to be able to do. Now with a new running back in, I don't know how much they're going to be able to run the football, but they're definitely going to build a game plan around the tight end.
We always talk, and by we, I mean writers, not analysts, about a home crowd, a good home crowd is worth, 10 points or whatnot. And Ohio State has definitely played in the toughest environment, going to Penn State with the whiteout at night. Well, we do have a night game on Halloween night, but there'll probably be less than 2,000 people there based on Big Ten rules of who can be there and whatnot. Do you buy into, I guess everybody buys into a point of just, when it comes to noise and not being able to communicate or whatnot, but do you think that there is a significant difference in how maybe how you approach things, even in terms of trying to scheme some things, of not necessarily having to deal with those huge emotional swings that you might be able to get, from the crowd?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a really good question, and I know Dave's been asked it as well. He talked about the scoop and score, and he thought the place would be rocking and the momentum would shift, but it felt like another practice. So I think I definitely buy into not having a crowd. I think the momentum part of the game isn't as important as it would be with a crowd, if that makes sense. But I definitely buy into, with nobody in the stands, being able to build momentum. And I think it also comes down to communication. When you're playing at Penn State with that whiteout, it's unbelievably hard to communicate. You got to use a silent count. If you're communicating, it's got to be hand gestures. And now, with no fans, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to communicate. I think the nerves are going to be down a little bit. It's when you see that whiteout and you're standing at the 50, it's got to be nerve-wracking, seeing all those people and all that noise. So I definitely think we're going to go into Penn State with a little more confidence than normal, just because the nerves aren't there with the whiteout being a 7:30 kickoff. Game day is going to be there. I think it's definitely going to be in our favor traveling to Penn State without the fans.
And we'll get your prediction on Friday when we release our staff predictions on the game. We kind of touched upon earlier about some things you'd like to see them improve upon or whatnot. I think we'll end this interview here on the BIA podcast by just saying, maybe a couple quick hitters of what are the keys to the game for Ohio State to win. Obviously, they need to run the ball better, blah, 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 blah. They're all the coach speak, big book of football coaching things that we could put out there. Leave that stuff to me. That's the simplistic stuff that I can wrap my head around. You're a lot smarter about this stuff than I am. So why don't you give us some more advanced quick hitters of what some of the keys for Ohio State will be?
Yeah, I'll start with offense. With them playing so much man, I think Dave's going to have to utilize bunch sets. That helps alleviate the pressure of having a defender in your face. It also gives receivers more space to work with. I think Dave's definitely going to have to utilize the crossing or mesh route, the rub routes. Versus Penn State, and I know we use that a ton versus Michigan because they play a ton of man, but I think it's going to be huge this week is being able to understand when they're going to get cover one or cover zero, and being able to call his man beaters at the right time, because they changed up their coverages at times. They would go a little bit of too high and play quarters or cover four, and then there'd be times where they would play man. So I'm sure the staff has an idea of when they're going to see what coverage. But I definitely think they're going to have to utilize bunch sets, because late in the game, Indiana used a ton of bunch sets, and that's when they had their most success on offense, was the last couple of drives, and then the drive in overtime. You'll see that they scored. They scored in overtime on a bunch wheel route with the number 3 receiver, and the guy that was manned up on the number 3 receiver got caught up in the bunch. So I think that's going to be a huge key to the game, is being able to utilize a bunch set formation. And I think they're going to have to use a ton of man beater concepts with rubs, the mesh route, shallow cross. I think that's going to be huge on Saturday. Defensively, it all comes down to matchups. I think they're going to come into the game throwing the football and running their quarterback. So we got to figure out who's going to be the best matchup to cover the tight end, and how are we going to take care of the running quarterback. And I think that's going to come down to how many guys we have in the box. I hope we're going to be in a one-high setting, and I hope we man up somebody on the tight end, take care of him, and just worry about the Q run, especially with the running back unit being pretty light. So I think if you stop the quarterback and the tight end for Penn State, I think you win that game. The receivers didn't wow me. I know they got a freshman that played fairly well, but I think if we go one high and we man up the tight end and really focus on the quarterback, I think we win this game on Saturday fairly easy.
And that's what the odds makers seem to think too. I mean, I saw the line open around 8. I've seen it as high as 13. We'll see what happens once the Sharps come in with their money on Saturday or whatnot, but I'm still definitely thinking this is a game that's going to go off certainly in double digits. From my writer's standpoint, I agree with you on the point of when I look at the offense, it's really Sean Clifford, the quarterback, and Pat Freiermuth, the tight end. And then, beyond that, Devin Ford is a nice enough running back. I think he can get some yards, but I don't think there's a reason why he wasn't the starter ahead of Journey Brown or Noah Cain. And then, they have a talented receiver in Jahan Dotson, but I don't think he's quite there yet. And then, on the other side of the ball, Ohio State certainly, offensively has plenty of weapons. I guess we're all going to wait with kind of bated breath to see what the status of Chris Olave will be after taking a couple of big hits during the game. People are concerned maybe he got his bell wrong or whatnot. Ryan Day not going to talk so much about injuries at this point. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. But I agree without giving away my final score prediction. I like Ohio State in this one if it doesn't give Penn State a lot of sudden changes and opportunities with short fields or whatnot. I mean, I certainly can remember plenty of times Ohio State held 2-3 score leads in State College and then took its foot off the accelerator. And I don't care if this Penn State team lost last week. It's still a dangerous Penn State team. This should have been a battle of top 10 teams. Now it's a battle of top 20 teams.
Yeah, they got a talented roster. I mean, they've recruited really well. I think Franklin's done a good job in that department. So there's going to be some talent on the field on Saturday night, but I just think we've got too much of it. I think defensively we'll be able to man them up. I don't think we're going to, other than the tight end, they don't have anybody that can blow the top off. So I'm not worried about them being able to throw the football. I'm just worried of how they're going to scheme the tight end and what our response is going to be and who's going to be matched up with them. So, yeah, I definitely agree with all points.
Last question I have, kind of just a random one. How many points do you think Ohio State needs to put up to have this one safe?
I was thinking about this morning. I was thinking 35.
35. There you go. There you have it.
Yep.
I'm going to have to go back and look at my prediction once we're done recording to see what I have there. I've already written mine. I like getting out ahead of things, but
yeah,
that always good stuff there. And I really appreciate Justin for joining us here on the BIA podcast. And I appreciate you all for listening to us. And we'll be back on Friday when we talk to Nate Bauer of Blue White Illustrated to get some stuff from that side of this big rivalry game. And can't wait to have you there. And until then, thanks for listening to the BIA podcast.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.